Question 1. Operational review demonstrates that CEZ Group is considering a new, complex revenue recognition strategy to accelerate reported earnings in anticipation of a major acquisition. The proposed strategy deviates from standard industry practice and has not been explicitly approved by the Internal Audit Committee or legal counsel. The finance team believes it is a permissible interpretation of existing regulations within the CEZ Group's operating jurisdiction, but there is no formal documentation supporting this interpretation. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional ethics for CEZ Group? Option A. Implement the new revenue recognition strategy immediately to demonstrate proactive financial management and support the acquisition, assuming the interpretation is valid until proven otherwise. Option B. Halt the implementation of the new strategy and initiate a formal review process involving the Internal Audit Committee, legal counsel, and external auditors to confirm its compliance with all applicable regulations and CEZ Group policies before any adoption. Option C. Adopt a slightly modified version of the strategy that is less aggressive but still aims to accelerate earnings, based on informal discussions with industry peers. Option D. Proceed with the strategy but document the team's interpretation internally, planning to seek formal approval retrospectively after the acquisition is completed. The correct answer is A. Implement the new revenue recognition strategy immediately to demonstrate proactive financial management and support the acquisition, assuming the interpretation is valid until proven otherwise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid growth and the imperative to adhere strictly to regulatory frameworks, specifically those governing financial reporting and disclosure within the CEZ Group's operational jurisdiction. The pressure to meet ambitious targets can tempt individuals to overlook or misinterpret regulatory requirements, leading to potential compliance breaches. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented review of all proposed accounting treatments against the CEZ Group's established internal policies and the relevant regulatory framework. This ensures that any financial reporting decisions are not only compliant, but also transparent and auditable. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of accurate financial reporting and good corporate governance, which are fundamental to maintaining investor confidence and regulatory trust. Adherence to the CEZ Group's internal control procedures and the applicable accounting standards, as dictated by the exam's jurisdiction, is paramount. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy risks misstating financial performance. This could lead to violations of disclosure requirements, potentially misleading stakeholders, and incurring penalties from regulatory bodies. Failing to consult with internal compliance or legal departments before implementing novel accounting treatments is a significant ethical and regulatory failure, as it bypasses essential checks and balances designed to ensure adherence to the law. Another incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about regulatory interpretation without seeking clarification or expert advice is equally problematic. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can result in unintentional noncompliance. Relying on informal discussions or past practices that may no longer be compliant with current regulations is a common pitfall that regulatory bodies actively scrutinize. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. Second, assess the proposed action against these standards, seeking expert advice from compliance, legal, or audit departments when uncertainty exists. Third, document all decisions and the rationale behind them, ensuring a clear audit trail. Finally, prioritize compliance and ethical conduct over short-term gains or expediency. Question 2. Comparative studies suggest that client instructions can sometimes diverge from optimal investment strategies or regulatory compliance. A client of CEZ Group, who has been receiving investment advice, instructs their advisor to execute a series of trades that the advisor believes are not in the client's best long-term interest and may also contravene certain disclosure requirements under the relevant regulatory framework. The advisor has a fiduciary duty to the client. How should the advisor proceed? Option A. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their instructions, explain the potential risks and regulatory implications, and propose alternative compliance strategies that align with the client's overall financial objectives. Option B. Execute only the trades that appear to be compliant, while ignoring the client's instructions for trades that seem non-compliant. Option C. Execute the trades as instructed by the client, as the client has the ultimate authority over their investments. Option D. Refuse to execute the trades and inform the client that their instructions are not in their best interest, without offering further explanation or alternatives. The correct answer is C. Execute the trades as instructed by the client, as the client has the ultimate authority over their investments. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preferences and the potential for those preferences to lead to suboptimal or even non-compliant investment outcomes. The CEZ Group hiring assessment test requires candidates to demonstrate an understanding of regulatory obligations and ethical conduct when faced with such situations. Careful judgment is required to balance client autonomy with the advisor's fiduciary duty and adherence to regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's long-term financial well-being and regulatory compliance over immediate, potentially ill-advised instructions. This means engaging in a thorough discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, educating them on the risks and regulatory implications, and proposing alternative, compliant solutions that align with their stated objectives. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework governing financial advice, which mandates that advisors act in the best interests of their clients, conduct appropriate due diligence, and ensure all recommendations and actions are compliant with applicable laws and regulations. Ethical principles also dictate transparency, honesty, and a commitment to avoiding harm. An incorrect approach would be to blindly follow the client's instructions without further inquiry or consideration of the consequences. This failure stems from a disregard for the advisor's professional responsibilities and regulatory obligations. Specifically, it breaches the duty to act in the client's best interests, as it prioritizes a potentially detrimental instruction over prudent advice. It also risks noncompliance with regulations that require suitability assessments and may lead to the facilitation of activities that are against the spirit or letter of the law. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand their perspective or offering alternatives. This demonstrates a lack of client centricity and a failure to engage in constructive dialogue, potentially damaging the client relationship and failing to identify underlying concerns that might be addressed through compliant means. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's request and the reasoning behind it. Second, assess the request against regulatory requirements, ethical standards, and the client's stated financial goals and risk tolerance. Third, clearly communicate the potential risks, benefits, and regulatory implications of the proposed action and any alternatives. Fourth, if the client's instruction remains problematic after discussion, explore compliant alternatives that achieve similar objectives. Finally, document all discussions, advice provided, and decisions made. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates that CEZ Group has secured a significant new long-term contract that is expected to materially impact its future revenue and profitability. The contract is currently confidential, and the internal team is debating the optimal timing for its public announcement, considering the upcoming quarterly earnings report. Which of the following actions best aligns with CEZ Group's regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Withhold the announcement of the contract until the scheduled quarterly earnings report, framing it as a positive development within the earnings release. Option B. Immediately disclose the material contract details to the relevant stock exchange and the public, adhering to all applicable securities laws and listing rules, regardless of the proximity to the quarterly earnings report. Option C. Announce the contract in a press release that vaguely mentions new business opportunities, without specifying the contract's nature or financial impact. Option D. Disclose the contract details only to key financial analysts and institutional investors prior to the public announcement to manage market expectations. Correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the material contract details to the relevant stock exchange and the public, adhering to all applicable securities laws and listing rules, regardless of the proximity to the quarterly earnings report. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for growth and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and market integrity. CEZ Group, as a publicly listed entity, operates under a framework that mandates transparency and accurate disclosure. The challenge lies in balancing the need to communicate positive developments to stakeholders with the absolute necessity of adhering to disclosure timelines and content regulations. Misinterpreting or deliberately delaying the announcement of significant information can lead to market manipulation, unfair advantage for some investors, and erosion of trust. The correct approach involves immediate and accurate disclosure of the material information to the relevant regulatory bodies and the public, in accordance with CEZ Group's obligations under applicable securities laws and stock exchange rules. This ensures compliance with the principle of equal access to information for all market participants, preventing insider trading and maintaining market fairness. Specifically, this would involve adhering to the disclosure requirements of the relevant stock exchange where CEZ Group is listed, and any national securities regulations that govern the timely reporting of material events. An incorrect approach would be to withhold the information until a more opportune moment for public relations, such as a scheduled earnings call or press release. This failure constitutes a breach of regulatory obligations, as material information must be disclosed promptly. It creates an information asymmetry, potentially allowing individuals with prior knowledge to trade advantageously, which is a form of market manipulation. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the information in a vague or misleading manner, attempting to downplay its significance. This violates the principle of truthful and complete disclosure, undermining investor confidence and potentially leading to regulatory sanctions for misrepresentation. Finally, disclosing the information only to a select group of analysts or investors before the public announcement would be a severe breach of fair disclosure rules, constituting selective disclosure and insider trading concerns. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves establishing clear internal protocols for identifying and reporting material information, ensuring timely communication channels with legal and compliance departments, and understanding the specific disclosure obligations under the relevant regulatory frameworks. When faced with a situation like this, the immediate step should be to consult with the compliance and legal teams to determine the precise disclosure requirements and timeline, ensuring that all actions taken are fully compliant and transparent. Question 4. Regulatory review indicates that a long-standing client of CEZ Group, Mr. Petrov, has expressed a strong desire to invest a significant portion of his portfolio in a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that has recently gained media attention. Mr. Petrov is aware of the risks but is motivated by the potential for rapid gains. As Mr. Petrov's assigned advisor at CEZ Group, you have conducted an initial assessment and believe this investment is not aligned with his stated long-term financial goals and risk tolerance, which are geared towards capital preservation and moderate growth. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CEZ Group advisor in this situation? Option A. Inform Mr. Petrov that CEZ Group cannot facilitate such a high-risk investment and suggest he seek advice from an independent financial advisor outside of CEZ Group. Option B. Proceed with the investment as requested by Mr. Petrov, assuming his stated desire overrides the advisor's assessment of suitability, and document his explicit instruction. Option C. Investigate the speculative asset class further to identify any potential, albeit unlikely, justifications for its inclusion in Mr. Petrov's portfolio, even if it stretches the boundaries of CEZ Group's risk management policies. Option D. Advise Mr. Petrov that, while you understand his interest, the proposed investment does not meet CEZ Group's suitability criteria for his profile and present alternative, compliant investment strategies that align with his established financial objectives and risk tolerance. The correct answer is D. Advise Mr. Petrov that while you understand his interest, the proposed investment does not meet CEZ Group's suitability criteria for his profile and present alternative, compliant investment strategies that align with his established financial objectives and risk tolerance. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific investment outcome and the advisor's obligation to act in the client's best interest, adhering strictly to the CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that recommendations are suitable and compliant, even when faced with client pressure. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with regulatory and ethical duties. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, followed by a recommendation of products and strategies that are demonstrably suitable and aligned with CEZ Group's compliance guidelines. This approach prioritizes the client's best interests, fulfilling the advisor's fiduciary duty and adhering to regulatory requirements for suitability and client care. It also ensures that any recommendations are documented and justifiable under CEZ Group's internal review processes. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's preferred investment without adequate due diligence, potentially leading to unsuitable recommendations. This failure to assess suitability and risk tolerance violates fundamental regulatory principles and CEZ Group's internal policies, exposing both the client and the firm to undue risk. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's concerns outright without offering alternative compliance solutions. This could damage the client relationship and fail to meet the obligation to provide appropriate advice. Finally, misrepresenting the risks or potential returns of any investment to appease the client is a clear breach of ethical conduct and regulatory mandates, constituting mis-selling. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's needs and objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive review of available products and strategies, assessing their suitability against the client's profile and CEZ Group's compliance standards. If a client's request conflicts with these standards, the professional must clearly communicate the reasons for non-compliance, explain the associated risks, and propose compliant alternatives that still aim to meet the client's underlying financial goals. Documentation of all discussions and decisions is paramount. Question 5. Consider a scenario where CEZ Group is seeking to streamline its hiring process for technical roles, aiming to reduce the time to hire by 20%. A new, proprietary assessment tool has been proposed by an external vendor, which claims to significantly accelerate candidate evaluation through advanced AI-driven analysis. However, the internal HR team has concerns that this tool may not fully align with the specific procedural requirements and fairness standards outlined in the CEZ Group Hiring Assessment Tests Regulatory Framework. What is the most appropriate approach for CEZ Group to consider in this situation? Option A. Implement the AI tool for initial screening only, and then revert to the traditional assessment methods for final evaluation, assuming this balances speed with thoroughness. Option B. Rely on the vendor's assurances regarding the tool's compliance and effectiveness and proceed with its immediate integration into the hiring workflow. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed AI tool to ensure its algorithms and data handling practices comply with the CEZ Group Hiring Assessment Tests specific guidelines on fairness, objectivity, and data privacy. And if compliant, pilot test it under controlled conditions before full implementation. Option D. Immediately adopt the new AI tool to achieve the 20% reduction in time to hire, as this efficiency gain is a key performance indicator for the hiring department. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed AI tool to ensure its algorithms and data handling practices comply with the CEZ Group Hiring Assessment Tests specific guidelines on fairness, objectivity, and data privacy. And if compliant, pilot test it under controlled conditions before full implementation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because CEZ Group, as a regulated entity, must balance operational efficiency with strict adherence to the CEZ Group Hiring Assessment Tests specific regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines. The pressure to optimize processes, such as candidate selection, can lead to shortcuts that inadvertently violate these mandates, risking reputational damage and regulatory penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization genuinely enhances efficiency without compromising compliance or fairness. The correct approach involves a thorough review and potential revision of the existing candidate assessment protocols to identify bottlenecks and areas for improvement, ensuring that any proposed changes are rigorously tested against the CEZ group hiring assessment tests specific requirements for fairness, objectivity, and data privacy. This approach is correct because it prioritizes compliance with the established regulatory framework. By systematically analyzing and modifying procedures within the defined legal and ethical boundaries, CEZ Group can achieve process optimization while upholding its commitment to fair hiring practices as mandated by the assessment test's guidelines. This proactive and compliant method ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of regulatory integrity. An incorrect approach would be to implement a new, unvetted screening tool solely based on its perceived speed and cost-effectiveness, without first verifying its compatibility with the CEZ group hiring assessment tests specific data handling and bias mitigation requirements. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because it risks introducing unfair biases or violating data privacy regulations that are implicitly or explicitly part of the assessment test framework. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass established validation procedures for assessment tools, opting instead for anecdotal evidence of their effectiveness. This fails to meet the rigorous standards expected within a regulated environment, potentially leading to discriminatory hiring practices and a breach of the assessment test's principles of objective evaluation. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize the speed of candidate onboarding over the thoroughness of assessment, leading to a reduction in the depth of evaluation for critical roles. This violates the spirit of a comprehensive hiring assessment, which aims to identify the most suitable candidates based on a holistic evaluation. As likely intended by the CEZ group hiring assessment tests design, professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the CEZ group hiring assessment tests' specific regulatory obligations. This involves identifying the core objectives of the assessment process and then evaluating any proposed optimization against these objectives and the associated legal and ethical constraints. A systematic approach involving pilot testing, stakeholder consultation, where appropriate and permitted by the framework, and a clear audit trail of decisions and their justifications is crucial. Prioritizing compliance and fairness, even when faced with pressure for efficiency, is paramount. Question 6. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of operational disruption and a high impact on reporting accuracy if CEZ Group's proposed process optimization for client onboarding is implemented without further review. Which of the following actions should CEZ Group prioritize? Option A. Focus solely on the efficiency gains identified in the optimization proposal, assuming that existing compliance checks will naturally adapt to the new process. Option B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed optimization on all relevant regulatory reporting requirements and implement a pilot program in a limited scope before full rollout. Option C. Proceed with the full implementation of the optimized process immediately to realize efficiency gains and address the risk matrix findings through post-implementation adjustments. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for assessing the impact of the optimization to the operational team responsible for implementing the changes, without involving the compliance department. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment of the proposed optimization on all relevant regulatory reporting requirements and implement a pilot program in a limited scope before full rollout. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing efficiency gains with the potential for unintended consequences that could impact regulatory compliance and client trust. CEZ Group, as a regulated entity, must ensure that any process optimization does not inadvertently lead to breaches of its operational or reporting obligations. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks before implementation. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment and phased implementation. This means CEZ Group's management should first analyze how the proposed process changes might affect existing controls, data integrity, and reporting accuracy. They should then pilot the optimized process in a controlled environment to identify any unforeseen issues. This methodical approach ensures that regulatory requirements are met throughout the optimization lifecycle and that potential disruptions are minimized. This aligns with the principle of maintaining robust internal controls and adhering to all applicable regulations, which is a fundamental expectation for entities operating within a regulated sector. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement the optimized process across all operations without prior testing or assessment. This carries a significant risk of disrupting existing compliance mechanisms, potentially leading to inaccurate reporting or operational failures that violate regulatory mandates. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings over a comprehensive risk assessment. While efficiency is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of regulatory adherence. Failing to consult with relevant compliance and legal departments before implementation is also a critical error, as it bypasses essential oversight and expertise necessary to ensure that the optimization aligns with all legal and regulatory frameworks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to CEZ Group's operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and industry guidelines. Next, they should conduct a comprehensive risk assessment for any proposed changes, considering potential impacts on compliance, data security, and client service. This assessment should inform a phased implementation plan, including pilot testing and contingency measures. Finally, ongoing monitoring and review are crucial to ensure that the optimized processes remain compliant and effective over time. Question 7. The investigation demonstrates that CEZ Group is seeking to enhance its operational efficiency and reduce costs across its energy generation and distribution network. Considering the company's commitment to regulatory compliance and sustainable practices within the Czech Republic, which of the following approaches to process optimization would be most professionally sound and ethically defensible for CEZ Group? Option A. Prioritize immediate cost savings by significantly reducing the frequency of routine equipment maintenance and safety inspections across all facilities. Option B. Introduce a cutting-edge, unproven automation technology from a foreign market without extensive internal testing or a pilot program, based on its perceived potential for rapid efficiency gains. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of current operational workflows, identify key performance indicators, and implement Lean Six Sigma methodologies to streamline processes and eliminate waste, ensuring all changes align with CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant Czech energy sector regulations. Option D. Replicate a recently publicized process improvement initiative implemented by a major European competitor, assuming similar operational benefits will be achieved at CEZ Group without further analysis. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of current operational workflows, identify key performance indicators, and implement Lean Six Sigma methodologies to streamline processes and eliminate waste, ensuring all changes align with CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant Czech energy sector regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for CEZ Group employees by requiring them to identify the most effective process optimization strategy within a specific regulatory context. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to adhere strictly to the CEZ Group's internal guidelines and relevant Czech Republic regulations governing energy sector operations. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to non-compliance, operational inefficiencies, reputational damage, and potential penalties. The need for deep understanding of both process improvement methodologies and the specific legal and regulatory landscape is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing operational workflows at CEZ Group, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through data analysis and stakeholder consultation. This is followed by the implementation of Lean Six Sigma principles, focusing on waste reduction and process standardization. This approach is justified because it directly addresses the core objective of process optimization by seeking to improve efficiency and reduce costs. Furthermore, it aligns with best practices in operational management and is likely to be compliant with general regulatory principles of good corporate governance and operational effectiveness, which are implicitly expected within the Czech energy sector. The emphasis on data-driven decisions and stakeholder involvement ensures a robust and well-supported optimization plan. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a new, unproven technology without a thorough pilot study or impact assessment is an incorrect approach. This fails to adhere to a principle of cautious and evidence-based decision-making, which is crucial in a regulated industry like energy. It risks introducing new inefficiencies or compliance issues without proper vetting, potentially violating internal CEZ Group risk management policies and relevant check technical standards. Focusing solely on cost reduction by cutting essential maintenance schedules is also an incorrect approach. While cost savings are a component of optimization, they cannot come at the expense of safety, reliability, or regulatory compliance. In the energy sector, inadequate maintenance can lead to service disruptions, safety hazards, and breaches of regulatory obligations concerning operational integrity, as stipulated by Czech energy law and safety directives. Adopting a copy-paste strategy from a competitor's publicly available process without understanding its applicability or regulatory context within CEZ Group is another incorrect approach. This ignores the unique operational environment, regulatory nuances, and internal policies of CEZ Group. It risks implementing a solution that is either non-compliant with Czech regulations or unsuitable for CEZ Group's specific infrastructure and operational model, leading to potential legal and operational failures. Professional reasoning. Professionals at CEZ Group should approach process optimization by first understanding the current state through comprehensive analysis, including data collection and stakeholder input. They must then evaluate potential optimization strategies against both efficiency goals and the specific regulatory framework of the Czech Republic and CEZ Group's internal policies. A phased implementation, starting with pilot programs and rigorous impact assessments, is essential. Continuous monitoring and adaptation, informed by data and regulatory compliance checks, are key to sustainable process improvement. This structured, evidence-based, and compliance-aware methodology ensures that optimization efforts are effective, responsible, and aligned with the company's strategic objectives and legal obligations. Question 8. The analysis reveals that CEZ Group is seeking to streamline its internal procurement procedures to reduce operational costs and improve turnaround times. A proposed optimization involves digitizing all vendor communication and contract management. Which of the following approaches best aligns with CEZ Group's commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical business practices under Czech law? Option A. Automating the entire procurement process, including vendor selection and contract approval, based on predefined algorithms without human oversight to maximize speed. Option B. Consolidating all vendor contracts into a single, easily accessible digital archive, prioritizing ease of retrieval for internal users over strict access controls. Option C. Implementing a new digital platform for all vendor interactions and contract storage, ensuring all data is encrypted and access is role-based with a clear audit trail for all actions. Option D. Adopting a cloud-based solution that offers the lowest subscription cost and fastest deployment, with minimal initial review of vendor data handling policies. The correct answer is C. Implementing a new digital platform for all vendor interactions and contract storage, ensuring all data is encrypted and access is role-based, with a clear audit trail for all actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for CEZ Group employees tasked with optimizing internal processes. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to adhere strictly to the CEZ Group's internal code of conduct and relevant Czech Republic regulations governing business operations and data handling. Misinterpreting or overlooking these guidelines can lead to non-compliance, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process optimization efforts do not inadvertently compromise ethical standards or legal obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing CEZ Group policies and relevant Czech Republic legislation before implementing any changes. This ensures that proposed optimizations are not only efficient but also compliant with all applicable rules. Specifically, this approach prioritizes understanding the regulatory framework, including data privacy laws, such as GDPR as implemented in Czech law, anti-corruption statutes, and internal governance policies. By proactively identifying and addressing potential compliance issues, CEZ Group can achieve process improvements without introducing new risks. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the legal requirement to operate within the bounds of the law. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications fails to uphold the company's ethical and legal responsibilities. For instance, implementing a new software system that collects employee data without proper consent or notification would violate data protection regulations. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over due diligence could lead to the adoption of processes that are not secure, potentially exposing sensitive company information to breaches, which would contravene internal security protocols and potentially check cybersecurity laws. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established internal approval processes for changes, even if seemingly efficient, undermines corporate governance and risk management frameworks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape and internal policies. This should be followed by a risk assessment of any proposed process change, identifying potential compliance gaps. Solutions should then be developed that not only meet efficiency goals, but also demonstrably satisfy all regulatory and ethical requirements. Continuous monitoring and review are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance as processes evolve. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a key operational workflow within CEZ Group's energy distribution division is experiencing significant delays, impacting customer service response times. Management is keen to implement rapid changes to improve efficiency. Which of the following strategies best balances the need for process optimization with CEZ Group's commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical operations? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the workflow, mapping all steps, identifying regulatory touchpoints, and proposing solutions that enhance efficiency while ensuring full compliance with all relevant energy sector regulations and internal ethical guidelines. Option B. Implement a series of immediate, unvetted procedural modifications based on anecdotal feedback from frontline staff to expedite task completion. Option C. Outsource a portion of the workflow to a third-party vendor with a reputation for speed, without conducting due diligence on the vendor's compliance procedures or the regulatory impact of such outsourcing. Option D. Focus exclusively on reducing the number of steps in the workflow, assuming that fewer steps will inherently lead to faster processing, without detailed analysis of regulatory implications. The correct answer is B. Implement a series of immediate, unvetted procedural modifications based on anecdotal feedback from frontline staff to expedite task completion. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because CEZ Group, as a regulated entity, must balance the pursuit of operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The pressure to optimize processes, while beneficial for business, can inadvertently lead to shortcuts or practices that compromise compliance or stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of regulatory integrity or ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic and transparent review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and proposing changes that are not only effective, but also fully compliant with all applicable CEZ Group internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes understanding the root causes of inefficiencies and developing solutions that integrate seamlessly with existing compliance structures. Specifically, it aligns with the principle of responsible business conduct, which mandates that all operational changes must be vetted against regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. This ensures that CEZ Group maintains its license to operate and upholds its reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications fails to acknowledge the paramount importance of compliance. This could lead to violations of regulations designed to protect consumers, market integrity, or environmental standards, resulting in significant fines, reputational damage, and potential loss of operating licenses. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes without proper stakeholder consultation or impact assessment overlooks the ethical obligation to consider the effects of decisions on employees, customers, and other relevant parties. This can foster distrust, lead to unforeseen operational disruptions, and create resistance to change, ultimately hindering long-term process optimization. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or superficial fixes rather than data-driven analysis risks implementing ineffective solutions that do not address the core issues, potentially wasting resources and perpetuating inefficiencies, while also failing to meet the professional standard of due diligence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and internal policies. This should be followed by a comprehensive analysis of the process, identifying both inefficiencies and potential compliance risks. Solutions should then be developed and evaluated not only for their efficiency benefits, but also for their regulatory compliance and ethical implications. Pilot testing and stakeholder engagement are crucial steps before full implementation to mitigate risks and ensure successful integration. Question 10. To address the challenge of improving operational efficiency within CEZ Group's energy distribution network, which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. Outsourcing the entire meter reading function to a third-party vendor without a detailed assessment of their compliance framework, focusing solely on the vendor's proposed cost structure. Option B. Implementing a new, unproven automated system for meter readings without a full compliance audit, prioritizing immediate cost savings. Option C. Conducting a thorough review of current meter reading and data management processes, identifying inefficiencies, and proposing optimized solutions that are pre-vetted against CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant energy sector regulations. Option D. Expediting the deployment of a revised data logging protocol by bypassing standard internal review procedures, assuming current regulations will not be impacted. The correct answer is B. Implementing a new, unproven automated system for meter readings without a full compliance audit, prioritizing immediate cost savings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because CEZ Group, as a regulated entity, must balance the drive for operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The pressure to optimize processes can lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps if not managed carefully. Professional judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise the integrity of operations or violate established guidelines. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing and implementing changes that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant CEZ Group internal policies and external regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes thoroughness and compliance, ensuring that any optimization efforts are sustainable and risk-averse. It aligns with the ethical obligation to operate responsibly and transparently, and the regulatory imperative to maintain high standards of operational control. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive compliance review risks violating regulatory mandates. For instance, implementing new software without adequate testing or validation could lead to data integrity issues, which are often subject to strict regulatory oversight. Another incorrect approach might involve bypassing established approval workflows for process changes. This bypass could lead to the introduction of unapproved methodologies or technologies that do not meet regulatory standards, thereby exposing CEZ Group to potential penalties and reputational damage. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in documentation and reporting could result in non-compliance with record-keeping requirements. Common area of regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the full scope of regulatory obligations related to the process being optimized. This involves consulting relevant internal compliance departments and external regulatory guidance. The next step is to assess potential process changes against these obligations, identifying any conflicts or areas requiring specific attention. Finally, proposed changes should undergo rigorous review and approval processes that explicitly incorporate compliance checks before implementation. Question 11. The review process indicates that CEZ Group's current candidate assessment workflow for technical roles is experiencing significant delays, impacting time-to-hire metrics. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline the process by reducing the number of mandatory interview stages and automating the initial screening of candidate responses using a new AI-powered tool. What is the most appropriate approach for CEZ Group to consider in optimizing this process while adhering to regulatory and ethical standards? Option A. Prioritize cost savings by eliminating the second interview stage entirely and relying solely on the AI tool's output for final candidate selection to reduce overhead. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing workflow, identifying specific bottlenecks, and then research and propose process modifications that are rigorously vetted for compliance with data protection, anti-discrimination laws, and professional assessment best practices, potentially including pilot testing the AI tool with appropriate oversight. Option C. Proceed with the AI tool implementation for initial screening, but bypass any formal validation or testing of its outputs, focusing on the speed of processing applications. Option D. Immediately implement the proposed changes to expedite the hiring process and improve time to hire, assuming the AI tool is industry standard. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement the proposed changes to expedite the hiring process and improve time to hire, assuming the AI tool is industry standard. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because CEZ Group, as a regulated entity, must ensure its internal processes, particularly those related to hiring and candidate assessment, are not only efficient, but also compliant with all relevant regulations and ethical standards. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise fairness, data privacy, or the integrity of the assessment itself. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency gains with these critical compliance and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of the existing hiring assessment process, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing improvements that are vetted for regulatory compliance and ethical soundness before implementation. This ensures that any changes made by CEZ Group do not violate data protection laws, anti-discrimination statutes, or professional assessment standards. It prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and its implications for process design. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory implications risks violating data privacy regulations by potentially mishandling candidate information or failing to obtain necessary consents. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction by eliminating essential assessment components could lead to discriminatory hiring practices, violating equal opportunity laws and CEZ Group's ethical commitments. Lastly, an approach that implements changes without proper validation or testing might inadvertently introduce biases or reduce the effectiveness of the assessment, undermining the fairness and reliability of the hiring process, which could have regulatory repercussions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements applicable to CEZ Group's hiring practices. This involves consulting relevant legal and compliance departments. Next, they should identify specific process pain points and brainstorm potential solutions, always evaluating each solution against regulatory compliance, ethical consideration, and the impact on assessment validity and fairness. Pilot testing and stakeholder feedback, including legal and HR, are crucial before full-scale implementation. Question 12. What factors determine the most appropriate method for process optimization within CEZ Group, considering the company's operational framework and regulatory environment? Option A. The adoption of industry-leading best practices from external sources, irrespective of CEZ Group's specific internal procedures. Option B. Prioritizing the speed of implementation for any proposed process changes to achieve immediate efficiency gains. Option C. A comprehensive review of CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, followed by an assessment of proposed changes against these guidelines. Option D. Focusing solely on cost reduction as the primary metric for evaluating process optimization initiatives. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive review of CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, followed by an assessment of proposed changes against these guidelines. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a CEZ Group employee tasked with optimizing internal processes. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains with the imperative to adhere strictly to the CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. Misinterpreting or overlooking these guidelines can lead to noncompliance, operational risks, and reputational damage. Therefore, a careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization initiative is both effective and compliant. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing CEZ Group internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks before proposing any process changes. This ensures that proposed optimizations are not only efficient, but also legally sound and aligned with the company's operational standards and ethical commitments. Specifically, Understanding the CEZ Group's established procedures for process change management, data handling, and stakeholder consultation is paramount. Adherence to these internal and external guidelines prevents potential breaches of compliance, safeguards data integrity, and maintains operational stability. This proactive, compliance-first methodology is the bedrock of responsible process optimization within a regulated environment like that of CEZ Group. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing changes based solely on external best practices without internal validation risks violating CEZ Group's specific operational protocols or regulatory obligations. External benchmarks may not account for unique internal constraints or legal requirements applicable to CEZ Group, leading to non-compliance. Prioritizing speed of implementation over a comprehensive review of internal policies can result in overlooking critical control points or compliance checks, thereby exposing CEZ Group to operational failures or regulatory penalties. Focusing exclusively on cost reduction without considering the impact on service quality or regulatory adherence can lead to a decline in customer satisfaction and potential breaches of service-level agreements or regulatory mandates. Professional reasoning. Professionals at CEZ Group should adopt a systematic decision-making process for process optimization. This begins with a clear understanding of the objective and scope. Next, a comprehensive review of all applicable CEZ Group internal policies, procedures, and relevant regulatory requirements must be conducted. This should be followed by an assessment of potential process changes against these established guidelines, identifying any conflicts or areas requiring specific attention. Stakeholder consultation, including legal and compliance departments, is crucial. Finally, proposed optimizations should be evaluated for their impact on efficiency, cost, quality, and compliance before implementation, with a robust monitoring and review mechanism in place post-implementation. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows a CEZ Group hiring manager reviewing applications for a senior compliance officer position. One candidate possesses exceptional academic qualifications and glowing references from previous employers, while another demonstrates strong practical experience in similar roles within the energy sector and a clear understanding of regulatory frameworks, though their academic background is less distinguished. A third candidate is known to the hiring manager through a professional network and appears to have relevant experience. The manager is under pressure to fill the role quickly, which approach best upholds CEZ Group's hiring standards and regulatory obligations. Option A. Offer the position to the candidate known through the professional network, as their existing rapport and apparent experience suggest a good fit and a faster onboarding process. Option B. Expedite the hiring process by selecting the candidate with the most readily verifiable qualifications, focusing on speed to meet the immediate staffing need. Option C. Prioritize the candidate with the most impressive academic credentials and strong references, assuming their theoretical knowledge will translate directly to practical application. Option D. Select the candidate who demonstrates a strong understanding of relevant regulatory frameworks and practical experience, even if their academic background is less prominent, and proceed with a thorough verification of their experience and suitability. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the candidate with the most impressive academic credentials and strong references, assuming their theoretical knowledge will translate directly to practical application. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a CEZ Group hiring manager is presented with multiple candidate profiles for a critical compliance role. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate staffing with the imperative to uphold the integrity of the hiring process and adhere strictly to CEZ Group's internal recruitment policies and relevant Czech Republic employment law. A hasty decision based on incomplete information or personal bias could lead to regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and ultimately, a suboptimal hire that undermines the compliance function. The correct approach involves a thorough, multi-stage review process that prioritizes objective assessment against defined criteria, ensuring all candidates are evaluated fairly and in accordance with CEZ Group's established hiring protocols. This includes verifying qualifications, conducting structured interviews that assess both technical skills and cultural fit, and performing due diligence as outlined in the company's policy. This method aligns with best practices in recruitment and is implicitly supported by Czech labor law, which mandates fair and non-discriminatory hiring practices. It also reflects the ethical obligation to maintain a robust and transparent recruitment process, safeguarding the company's interests and ensuring the appointment of a competent individual to a sensitive role. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the candidate with the most impressive academic credentials without verifying practical experience or assessing their alignment with CEZ Group's values would be a failure. This overlooks the importance of a holistic evaluation and could lead to hiring someone who is theoretically qualified but practically unsuitable or lacks the ethical grounding required for a compliance position. Another incorrect approach, prioritizing the candidate who is readily available and can start immediately, disregards the due diligence required and risks overlooking a more qualified candidate or hiring someone who does not meet the essential requirements, potentially violating internal policies and employment regulations concerning proper vetting. Finally, an approach that relies heavily on informal recommendations without objective assessment fails to establish a defensible and fair selection process, opening the door to bias and potentially overlooking critical red flags that formal assessment methods would uncover, thereby contravening principles of meritocracy and due diligence. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defined job requirements and evaluation criteria. This framework should include multiple assessment points, such as resume screening, skills-based assessments, structured interviews, and reference checks, all conducted in a consistent manner across all candidates. The process must be documented, and decisions should be based on objective evidence gathered during these stages, ensuring compliance with internal policies and relevant legal frameworks. Question 14. Operational review demonstrates that a client of CEZ Group has specifically requested to invest in a particular high-risk, illiquid alternative investment product that they have heard about. The client expresses strong confidence in this product's potential returns. As a CEZ Group financial advisor, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure both client well-being and regulatory compliance? Option A. Inform the client that CEZ Group does not offer such products and decline the request without further discussion. Option B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance to determine if the requested product is suitable, and if so, proceed with appropriate disclosures. Option C. Immediately execute the investment as requested by the client, given their expressed confidence and desire. Option D. Proceed with the investment, but only disclose the potential upside, omitting details about the significant risks and illiquidity. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance to determine if the requested product is suitable, and if so, proceed with appropriate disclosures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the regulatory obligations of a financial advisor. The advisor must navigate the client's desire for a specific investment product, with the need to ensure that product is suitable and compliant with all relevant regulations. The CEZ Group hiring assessment test likely assesses the candidate's understanding of regulatory frameworks and ethical conduct in client interactions. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance before recommending any product, including the one the client has expressed interest in. This aligns with the principles of client suitability and fiduciary duty, which are paramount in financial services. Specifically, it requires the advisor to act in the client's best interest, ensuring that any recommendation is appropriate for their circumstances and complies with all applicable regulations governing investment advice and product offerings. This proactive due diligence prevents potential regulatory breaches and protects both the client and the firm from adverse consequences. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's request without independent verification of suitability. This fails to uphold the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest and could lead to a recommendation that is not appropriate, potentially resulting in financial harm to the client. Such an action would also likely contravene regulatory requirements that mandate suitability assessments. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring the underlying reasons or offering alternatives. While the client's initial suggestion might not be suitable, a professional advisor should engage in a dialogue to understand their motivations and guide them towards appropriate solutions. This approach risks alienating the client and failing to meet their needs effectively. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to provide the requested product without fully disclosing all associated risks and fees. Transparency is a cornerstone of ethical financial advising and regulatory compliance. Failing to disclose material information can lead to misinformed decisions by the client and potential regulatory sanctions. A professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured approach. First, actively listen to and understand the client's request and underlying motivations. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial profile and objectives. Third, evaluate the suitability of the requested product against this profile and relevant regulations. Fourth, if the product is suitable, proceed with appropriate disclosures. If not, explain the reasons clearly and propose suitable alternatives. And finally, document all interactions and decisions thoroughly. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a long-standing client of CEZ Group, MS, Anya Sharma, has expressed a strong desire to invest in a high-risk speculative technology fund, citing a recent news article as her sole basis for this interest. MS. Sharma has a moderate risk tolerance and a conservative investment objective, primarily focused on capital preservation for her retirement. As her financial advisor at CEZ Group, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Explain to MS. Sharma that the speculative technology fund is not suitable given her stated risk tolerance and investment objectives, and propose alternative investments that align with her profile, providing detailed rationale. Option B. Invest in a diversified technology-focused ETF that has a lower risk profile than the speculative fund, without explicitly discussing the difference with MS Sharma to satisfy her interest in technology. Option C. Proceed with the investment in the speculative technology fund as requested by MS Sharma, assuring her it aligns with her stated interest. Option D. Advise MS Sharma that her request cannot be fulfilled due to her stated conservative objectives and suggest she seek advice elsewhere if she wishes to pursue high-risk investments. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the investment in the speculative technology fund as requested by MS Sharma, assuring her it aligns with her stated interest. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific investment outcome and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. Adhering strictly to CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines, the advisor must navigate the potential for misrepresentation or undue influence while ensuring all advice is suitable and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough suitability assessment that prioritizes the client's stated objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation, aligning with CEZ Group's internal compliance framework and any applicable regulatory mandates for financial advice. This approach ensures that any recommendation is not only aligned with the client's stated goals, but also demonstrably in their best interest, supported by objective analysis and documentation. It upholds the ethical principle of putting the client first and adheres to regulatory requirements for providing sound financial advice. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on fulfilling the client's stated desire without a comprehensive suitability review risks recommending unsuitable products or strategies. This could lead to regulatory breaches related to mis-selling or failure to conduct adequate due diligence. Another incorrect approach, which involves subtly steering the client towards a product that benefits the firm more, even if not the absolute best for the client, violates the fiduciary duty and CEZ Group's ethical standards, potentially leading to conflicts of interest and regulatory sanctions. Finally, an approach that dismisses the client's stated goals without proper investigation and explanation fails to respect the client's autonomy and may not adequately address their underlying needs, potentially leading to dissatisfaction and a breach of trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the client's objectives and circumstances. This is followed by a rigorous suitability analysis, considering all available options and their alignment with the client's profile and regulatory requirements. Transparency and clear communication with the client about the rationale behind recommendations are paramount. Documentation of the entire process, including the suitability assessment and client discussions, is crucial for demonstrating compliance and ethical conduct. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that CEZ Group financial advisors are increasingly encountering situations where clients request actions that may border on or directly contravene established regulatory guidelines. Imagine you are a financial advisor at CEZ Group, and a long-standing client, who is also a personal acquaintance, expresses a strong desire to execute a complex investment strategy that you believe, based on your understanding of CEZ Group's internal compliance manual and relevant Czech financial market regulations, carries an unacceptably high risk of misrepresentation and potential regulatory scrutiny. The client is insistent, citing their personal trust in your judgment and their desire for a specific, aggressive return. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CEZ Group financial advisor in this situation? Option A. Execute a modified version of the client's strategy that you believe is less risky but still aims for a similar aggressive return, without explicitly informing the client of the modifications or the original regulatory concerns. Option B. Advise the client to seek independent legal counsel to review the proposed strategy, effectively deferring the decision and responsibility without directly addressing the regulatory concerns yourself. Option C. Politely but firmly decline the client's requested strategy, clearly explaining the specific regulatory concerns and CEZ Group policy limitations that prevent its execution, and offer to explore alternative, compliant investment strategies that align with their risk tolerance. Option D. Proceed with the client's requested strategy, assuring them that your personal relationship and judgment will mitigate any potential issues, and document the conversation as per standard procedure. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the client's requested strategy, assuring them that your personal relationship and judgment will mitigate any potential issues, and document the conversation as per standard procedure. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific outcome and the advisor's obligation to provide objective, compliant advice. The advisor must navigate the pressure to satisfy the client while upholding regulatory standards and ethical principles. Careful judgment is required to balance client relationships with professional integrity. The correct approach involves clearly communicating the regulatory limitations and explaining why the client's requested action is not permissible. This demonstrates adherence to the CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, prioritizing compliance and client protection over short-term client satisfaction. It involves transparency about the reasons for the refusal, offering alternative, compliant solutions, and documenting the interaction thoroughly. This aligns with the principles of acting in the client's best interest within the bounds of the law and ethical conduct. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the client's request, despite knowing it violates regulations, would constitute a serious breach of professional conduct and regulatory requirements. This could lead to disciplinary action, reputational damage for both the individual and CEZ Group, and potential harm to the client. Another incorrect approach of simply refusing without explanation or offering alternatives fails to uphold the duty of care and client service expected of a professional. It can damage the client relationship and may not adequately address the underlying client need. A third incorrect approach of attempting to circumvent regulations through loopholes or misinterpretations is unethical and carries significant legal and professional risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and relevant regulations. They should then assess the potential consequences of various actions, prioritizing compliance and ethical considerations. Open and honest communication with the client, offering compliant alternatives, and meticulous record-keeping are crucial steps in managing such dilemmas. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance departments is essential. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal a minor but material discrepancy in a recent report provided to a key client of CEZ Group. The discrepancy, if left uncorrected, could lead to a slight misinterpretation of the client's portfolio performance, but correcting it would require admitting an internal oversight and could potentially strain the relationship with this high-value client. Option A. Correct the report internally without informing the client or the compliance department, assuming the error is minor enough not to cause significant issues. Option B. Instruct the junior analyst who identified the error to adjust the report discreetly before it is finalized, ensuring the client receives an accurate final version without any mention of the initial discrepancy. Option C. Inform the client's relationship manager of the discrepancy and suggest waiting to see if the client notices it before deciding on a course of action. Option D. Immediately report the discrepancy to the compliance department and the client's relationship manager, proposing a plan to issue a corrected report and explain the oversight. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the discrepancy to the compliance department and the client's relationship manager, proposing a plan to issue a corrected report and explain the oversight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between a company's internal policies, potential client relationships, and the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and confidentiality. CEZ Group, as a financial institution, is subject to stringent regulatory requirements regarding client data and the accuracy of information provided to clients. The pressure to overlook a minor error to maintain a positive client relationship, especially with a significant client, creates an ethical dilemma. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and professional integrity. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the identified error to the relevant internal compliance and risk management teams, followed by a proactive plan to rectify the error and communicate it to the client. This upholds CEZ Group's commitment to accuracy and regulatory adherence. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of integrity and due diligence expected of financial professionals and the regulatory framework governing financial reporting and client communication. Prompt disclosure and correction demonstrate accountability and build long-term trust, which is more valuable than a short-term gain from concealing an error. An incorrect approach of ignoring or downplaying the error would be a direct violation of CEZ Group's internal policies on data accuracy and reporting. It would also breach regulatory obligations to provide accurate information to clients and potentially lead to misinformed investment decisions by the client, creating significant financial and reputational risk for CEZ Group. Furthermore, attempting to rectify the error without proper internal notification and documentation could be seen as an attempt to conceal a compliance breach, further exacerbating the situation. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of the situation. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and regulatory guidelines. 3. Escalating the issue to the appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., compliance, risk management, direct supervisor. 4. Developing a plan for remediation and communication that prioritizes accuracy and transparency. 5. Executing the plan with diligence and ensuring proper documentation. Question 18. Strategic planning requires CEZ Group to consider potential operational disruptions. If a significant, unforeseen operational issue arises that could materially impact the company's financial performance or stock price, what is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for CEZ Group's management to take regarding public disclosure? Option A. Downplay the severity of the operational issue in public statements and wait to see if it resolves itself before making any formal disclosures. Option B. Immediately disclose the operational issue and its potential impact to all relevant regulatory bodies and the public in accordance with CEZ Group's disclosure policies and applicable Czech Republic capital markets laws. Option C. Inform only a select group of institutional investors and key analysts about the operational issue to manage market perception. Option D. Delay any public disclosure until the operational issue is fully resolved and a positive narrative can be presented to the market. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the operational issue and its potential impact to all relevant regulatory bodies and the public in accordance with CEZ Group's disclosure policies and applicable Czech Republic capital markets laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and transparently. CEZ Group, as a publicly traded entity, is subject to stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The challenge lies in navigating the pressure to present a favorable image while adhering to the absolute priority of truthful and complete disclosure, especially when dealing with potentially negative operational issues. Careful judgment is required to balance stakeholder interests and legal obligations. The correct approach involves proactively and transparently communicating the identified operational issue to relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies and the public, in accordance with CEZ Group's disclosure policies and applicable regulations. This approach upholds the principle of market integrity by ensuring that all market participants have access to timely and accurate information. Specifically, adherence to the CEZ Group's internal code of conduct and relevant Czech Republic capital markets laws, which mandate disclosure of price-sensitive information, is paramount. This transparency builds trust and mitigates the risk of regulatory sanctions or reputational damage stemming from delayed or misleading information. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit the operational issue in public communications, hoping it resolves itself or goes unnoticed. This constitutes a failure to comply with disclosure obligations, potentially misleading investors and the market. Such an action violates ethical principles of honesty and integrity, and could lead to severe regulatory penalties, including fines and reputational damage, as well as potential legal action from shareholders. Another incorrect approach would be to selectively disclose the information, perhaps only to a select group of analysts or investors, while withholding it from the broader public. This creates an unfair information advantage for some and is a clear violation of equal treatment principles and disclosure regulations. It undermines market fairness and can result in significant regulatory scrutiny and sanctions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay disclosure until the issue is fully resolved and a positive spin can be applied. While the desire to present a resolved problem is understandable, regulatory frameworks often require disclosure of material events as they occur or are identified, regardless of their current resolution status. Delaying disclosure can be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate market perception and can lead to penalties for noncompliance with timely disclosure requirements. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a multi-step process. 1. Identify the material information and its potential impact. 2. Consult CEZ Group's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, Czech Republic capital markets laws, stock exchange rules. 3. Assess the urgency and scope of disclosure required. 4. Prepare clear, accurate, and timely communication. 5. Disclose the information through the appropriate channels to all relevant stakeholders simultaneously. 6. Monitor the situation and provide updates as necessary. This systematic approach ensures compliance, ethical conduct, and effective risk management. Question 19. The audit findings indicate a potential misstatement in the financial statements of a key client, Energo Tech Solutions. Simultaneously, it is discovered that an employee within CEZ Group's audit department, who is involved in the Energo Tech Solutions audit, holds a significant personal investment in Energo Tech Solutions. This personal investment was not previously disclosed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CEZ Group employee involved in the audit? Option A. Continue with the audit, exercising extra diligence to ensure the accuracy of the findings, and address the personal investment after the audit is completed. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal investment to CEZ Group management and recuse oneself from all further involvement with the Energo Tech Solutions audit. Option C. Discreetly attempt to influence the audit findings to mitigate any negative impact on Energo Tech Solutions, given the personal investment. Option D. Keep the personal investment confidential and proceed with the audit as planned, assuming it will not affect professional judgment. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal investment to CEZ Group management and recuse oneself from all further involvement with the Energo Tech Solutions audit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need to address audit findings with the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and avoid conflicts of interest. The CEZ Group employee is privy to sensitive information that could impact the financial standing of a client, and their personal investment creates a direct conflict. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests without compromising professional integrity or violating regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal authority within CEZ Group and recusing oneself from any further involvement in the audit or client relationship. This upholds the principle of acting with integrity and objectivity, as mandated by professional ethical codes. By reporting the conflict, the employee ensures that CEZ Group can take appropriate steps to manage the situation, such as reassigning the audit or implementing additional oversight, thereby protecting the firm's reputation and client interests. This proactive disclosure prevents any appearance of impropriety and demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the audit findings or the personal investment, hoping the issue resolves itself. This fails to meet the ethical duty of care and integrity, potentially leading to a breach of confidentiality and a severe conflict of interest. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to influence the audit findings based on personal knowledge of the client's financial situation. This constitutes a serious ethical violation, undermining the independence and objectivity of the audit process and potentially leading to regulatory sanctions. Finally, failing to disclose the conflict to CEZ Group management and continuing to work on the audit, even with the intention of being extra diligent, still creates an unacceptable risk of bias and a breach of professional standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, understanding the relevant professional codes of conduct and internal firm policies, and proactively seeking guidance or reporting the situation to the appropriate authority. Transparency and integrity are paramount in maintaining trust and upholding the reputation of both the individual and the firm. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal a significant discrepancy in the reported revenue figures for a key project at CEZ Group, potentially impacting the company's quarterly earnings. While the discrepancy is not immediately obvious, it could lead to restatements if discovered later. An employee notices this and is aware of the potential implications. What is the most appropriate course of action for this employee to take? Option A. Attempt to resolve the discrepancy internally with the project team without involving compliance or audit to avoid unnecessary alarm. Option B. Proceed with the current reporting, making a note to investigate and correct the discrepancy in the following quarter's reporting. Option C. Immediately report the discrepancy to the CEZ Group's compliance and internal audit departments for investigation and resolution. Option D. Adjust the revenue figures to align with expectations, assuming the discrepancy is a minor error that will not materially affect overall results. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the discrepancy to the CEZ Group's compliance and internal audit departments for investigation and resolution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between the immediate financial interests of CEZ Group and the long-term ethical obligation to maintain market integrity and investor confidence. Pressure to meet short-term targets can tempt individuals to overlook or downplay potential issues, creating a significant ethical dilemma that requires careful judgment. The potential for reputational damage and regulatory scrutiny if the issue is not handled appropriately adds to the complexity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately escalating the identified discrepancy to the relevant compliance and internal audit departments. This is the right course of action because it adheres to the principles of transparency, accountability, and good corporate governance. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial reporting and market conduct, mandate that material discrepancies be reported promptly to ensure accurate financial statements and prevent market manipulation. By involving compliance and audit, CEZ Group demonstrates its commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, allowing for a thorough investigation and appropriate remediation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the discrepancy and proceeding with the current reporting, even with a plan to correct it later, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This approach risks misrepresenting the financial position of CEZ Group to stakeholders and regulators, potentially violating accounting standards and securities laws. It undermines the principle of timely and accurate disclosure. Attempting to resolve the discrepancy internally without involving compliance or audit, especially if it involves significant financial figures, is also problematic. This can lead to a biased assessment of the issue and may not identify all root causes or potential systemic weaknesses. It bypasses established internal control mechanisms designed to ensure objectivity and compliance. Concealing the discrepancy or attempting to manipulate the data to make it appear correct, even if done with the intention of avoiding immediate negative attention, constitutes fraudulent behavior. This is a severe ethical and legal violation, leading to significant penalties, loss of trust, and potential criminal charges. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the ethical and regulatory obligations relevant to the situation. Second, they should gather all pertinent facts objectively. Third, they should consider the potential consequences of different courses of action, both for themselves and for CEZ Group. Finally, they should choose the action that best upholds ethical principles, regulatory requirements, and the company's long-term integrity, which in this case involves immediate and transparent escalation to the appropriate internal functions.